It's great to listen to your talk after some time.
Yeah.
And you made some great points, which I hope that now we have some time to discuss. I don't know about the other participants. Maybe for many it was a little bit fast.
Maybe.
But anyway, we can check now. So if anyone would like to ask a question, it could be just some simple questions like about some terms, the so-called comprehension. Or if you want to discuss something, please raise your hand and ask your question. I saw that we have one question in the chat.
Okay.
But let's see first from the audience. Is there anyone, or you would like to think a little bit more?
Yeah.
Do you know each other?
We do.
We know each other.
Oh yeah.
I know
Right.
very well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm
He was in Kitakyushu.
Yeah, so can I ask you a question about some of your slides? Just
Certainly.
kind of technical.
Yeah.
So, for example, slide number 46.
Yeah.
So this research where you use like different proxies for these social equity concepts.
Yeah.
I wonder, why do you call energy access level like participation? Isn't it a little bit confusing? Because when I imagine participation, I imagine like people participating in some kind of policy or something like
Absolutely. No, you're absolutely correct. So the reason that we use participation as energy access here is because, coming back to your point exactly, especially in low income and developing nations, being able to participate in policy or participate in those discussions, the entry point for being able to do that is actually to have energy. So I think it would be very logical to say that those that don't have energy access could not participate in those discussions because they wouldn't be impacted. So we're just trying to identify which group can participate. But a really great question, yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. And if you go to the next slide,
Yeah.
also, I wonder, this like pink area and
So mathematically speaking, if you take any point given by this triangle, the only places that the centroid can move are within the pink rectangle. That's the mathematical derivation of an area-weighted centroid. And so the best possible outcome is here.
so for each different country, this rectangle will be different.
Yeah, so the maximum
area.
point, so if they had 100% renewables, it would be here. If they had 100% of the social equity factors satisfied, it would be here. This is just an example, but for each country, this is drawn for each of the years evaluated. So 99 times 26 times the number of factors. Yeah, it's derived for each one.
So for example, for more like high income countries and more like socially just countries, this rectangle will be like a little bit to the right.
Yes. So as this shifted, but this assumes an 100 for each of these corners. That's the point within that the vector can move within. Yeah, but that's just the mathematical limits. That's all. So you would say this is the best, and this would be the worst. Yeah. But logically, you would think the worst would be 0, but mathematically, that's how it derives out. But really good questions. Yeah.
All right, I will give.
Okay.
Maybe later again.
Yeah. Greg.
Yeah, thanks very much. Very interesting presentation. So I would like to offer my interpretation of your finding.
Go for it.
About the lack of awareness in Japan about just transition. So I've actually been asked to give a bit of a presentation on this topic, and I'm not an expert. I'm actually a bit uncomfortable about tackling this topic. And one of the the interest of my person that invited me was who in Japan is talking about the just transition. And I sort of had a quick look at policy documents.
Yeah.
And the two policy documents I chose were the sixth basic energy strategy.
Good.
And the the carbon neutral green growth strategy.
Sure.
Yeah. And so I had a quick look at those, and there's no mention of just transition. But what I found was that there's mention of elements that actually are very relevant to the just transition.
Absolutely. Yep.
The elements that seem to be discussed are especially related to electrification of mobility.
Yep.
And the loss of the decline of the power supply chain.
Okay.
And also there's mention of gasoline stations.
Sure.
And so there's mention of repurposing gasoline stations. EV charging, and also hydrogen and offering other services.
Yes.
There's mention of retraining people in the supply chain for making parts.
Yep.
And I thought this is really relevant stuff, but it's just not, framed as a just transition.
It's not. And also interesting, in the preamble of the 6th Basic Energy Plan, they talk about the reconstruction and the sort of reallocation of benefits and such in Fukushima, and the fact that Tokyo energy generation is responsible for this. They do talk about them, but yes, if you look for the words energy justice or just transition, or even the word just, you won't get it.
Yeah.
Absolutely true. Yeah.
So I just think that, I guess Europe, having, I guess, these mineral resources, coal especially, and having these workers directly impacted, I think that was probably the start, just the shift away from coal.
Absolutely.
So
Yes.
I think Japan, importing these resources, we kind of missed out on that.
We did.
At the starting point.
Historically, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's, so there's, I guess, I gave you a kind of my interpretation of a reason,
Yep.
and I guess the interpretation of this.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. And I think that I was talking to President Ialnazov today about this very thing.
Dimiter, please.
I was talking to Dimiter earlier today about this. And one of the things that I think we both agree on is that there's a saying in Japan: if America sneezes, Japan catches a cold. That's what we say. And usually it's used for economic things. If the economy goes down in America, then it will follow that other countries also be affected. But I think it's also true with what are the positive or popular concepts of the day. So carbon neutrality kind of started somewhere and eventually got here. And then in Europe now, energy justice is quite big, and eventually it will get here. But how it's framed and how it's shared, yeah, absolutely critical. I couldn't agree more. Yeah.
In Europe, we also have some historical traditions. We also discussed that before the workshop, very strong social democratic tradition.
Yeah.
The participation of workers in the so-called grand bargain,
absolutely,
with employers, with the government, the tripartite model. This is kind of typical for Europe, while in Japan, usually what they say for the Japanese model of capitalism is that workers are lacking from the model. It's basically government and big business that are doing these negotiations. So that could be one possible explanation too.
Yeah. Traditions are super important. And in fact, in the multi-level perspective of energy transitions, words like culture form part of that. And we're not talking about culture like I love Hello Kitty. We're talking about, these cultural traditions about how governments and people interact. Yeah, absolutely true.
All right. Robin?
Yeah. Robin,
could you introduce yourself?
Exchange student during the university. I have a question to the page number 51.
51?
Which is, do you find in your study any reasons why an increase of renewable energy yields to an decrease in social equity?
Yes, we do. And it's actually very interesting. And that's probably the best question I've had for a very long time. So thank you very, very much. First of all, I want you to look at the map and notice that there's clusters, right? You'll see that Eastern Europe, for example, or the eastern part of Western Europe does have a kind of a cluster that's happening there. And advanced countries like Japan and Korea here, and Australia and Oceania, you'll see that. And the others that are kind of winning are close together. There are some exceptions, but there are clusters. One of the things to be aware of is that it's a comparative model. So all of the countries are compared to a mean. And so for countries that are sort of this light orange color, we actually have a better map that shows the range. Countries like Japan and Australia, because they started at such a high point, the loss of some jobs or the change in one dynamic can pull their score down just slightly, which means that they don't then achieve both positives. The other reason that some countries get a really good outcome is because they started from a very low base. The third thing that's hidden in this, and the reason that I very carefully said that it's not causal, but it's correlated, is often what happens is the countries that are seeing a significant growth in renewables are seeing an even bigger growth in fossil fuels. So for example, their populations are rapidly increasing, or their electrification in their country is rapidly increasing, right? So think about countries, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, which actually get quite a good outcome. Some of them had almost no energy access in 1990. So just a solar panel in their village meant that they finally had some energy access compared to none. So their scores can be radically increased. So there are a lot of reasons why some don't achieve them. And yeah, a lot of it is about industrial shifts, especially in these lesser developed. I mean, I can see that Germany is one of those, and that's certainly not a lesser developed nation in Europe, but there would have been some heavy employment outcomes. In fact, Dimiter mentioned just previously, or maybe it was over here, about the coal mining tradition of some of these countries. So Germany, for example, at the moment is moving away from things like brown coal mining and shifting towards renewables, but they're paying a price. Their energy prices are increasing in the short term. Over long term, they'll go down as energy learning curves proceed. But yeah, there are some short-term pain or some long-term gain in some of these countries. Yeah, but a really great question. No one really ever picks up on that. They just go, oh, 74, that's pretty good. And no one really digs into the detail. But yeah.
The way he started, like slide number 51.
Yeah. You know, he's ready.
It was interesting.
And I think this also shows it too. So you can see based on the different income level of the country. So you would assume that low income nations would be very heavily represented by the sub-Saharan African group and things like that, and maybe Southeast Asia. And so you would see that new renewable energy is you know, seems to be very heavily linked to, you know, energy access, which is great. The energy costs are also improved, you know, these kind of things. So maybe there's some really old infrastructure that's being replaced by really new infrastructure. So the learning curves are such that there is an immediate reduction in costs. Yeah, I think this draws out some of that, but on a nation by nation basis, you could look at it. The data is there. Yeah, thank you for that excellent question.
I have a few, and I'm Jordan.
There you go, Jordan.
Great. So first, just to make sure, because I didn't read through the paper, but I get it very quickly.
Sure.
You excluded older renewables like hydroelectricity from this.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I thought so. Because I noticed, like, if you go back forward one slide, I guess.
Forward one slide, yeah.
Yeah, like Canada and Norway.
Yeah.
Have
so it's new. Yeah, it's the renewable energy transition. So it's new renewable energy. So whatever the existing stock was is excluded. And hydroelectricity is the most heavily excluded because that's 50 or 60 years old. And we don't see a lot of new stuff because it takes 20, 30, 40 years to develop as a national plan. So yes, good pickup, new RE. Very good. Yeah.
And then spinning off of his question.
Yeah.
Go forward, I think 2, 3 slides.
One more? Okay.
Right. Did you control in this period for social equity, as you said, linking with increased fossil fuel, but in particular production and export? Because in that last 2005 to 2015 period, you had the shale boom in the US.
Yeah.
You had the oil sands really take off
Yes.
in Canada.
Yes.
So some of those social equity increases there were not tied to renewables at all.
No, they're not. And to answer your question in 2 dimensions, we do not control in terms of statistical evaluation for that factor. But, and I don't know if 26 years is enough. One of the issues we see, especially in Asia, so I'd give China as the example in that case, would be while they deployed this much more renewables, they deployed this much more coal.
Yeah.
And we know that that means that all these new jobs were made and all these great things that also link to social equity are improved, but are completely unrelated to renewable energy. But we also know that 20 years in the future, those things are going to have really negative, so especially things like health, especially things like cost and all that sort of stuff. But did we control for it? Yes. At the foot of the paper, you'll see there's it might be an appendix actually, we regress for those effects. And fossil fuels is one of them. The subsidization of fossil fuels is another. So the Middle East is a big one there. And we note that nations that heavily subsidize fossil fuels have much slower energy transitions. So there are some controls in there. Please have a look at the appendices. It does control for those there. Yeah, no, really good pickup. The one thing that, and this is why we can't say it's causal, because there are so many exogenous or externalities that you just cannot account for. And so that's a real danger of saying, oh, look, renewables, the answer, just do that.
Well, and especially when you're looking at national data. Because
yes. No, I think
in the last 10 years or so, that
Yeah.
means that Ontario phased out coal.
Yes.
Completely. But at the same time, Alberta and Saskatchewan built out the oil sands.
exactly.
So it's highly regional.
When I give this presentation just about this paper, the discussion deals with things like the development curve, subsidization, those kind of factors. But today I've just given an overview. But yeah, please have a look at the second paper that I showed at the end. I think you'll find that we do neatly control and discuss those factors because they make big impacts. Yeah, both on the scores, but also, like I said, even just looking at the last 7 years, but controlling over time for those kind of peaks and breaks, I think we're going to see that they're going to have to pay for those decisions in the future. Yeah. Yeah, no, really good pickup. Thanks for that.
Thank you.
Greg.
Okay. Just going back to the data set that you used, I think it's for the same paper.
Yeah.
There's an interesting indicator I see used frequently, but similar papers, and that's the is it the democracy index?
Yeah.
Did you consider using that, especially because there was a conversation before about participation, and I just thought you like transparency of governance or that is relevant. So
I think that's nice, but the democracy index is a national level indicator. It's one score, whereas energy access accounts for population shares between rural and urban groups. And so that really shows one of the existing divides in social equity is just the gap between those two people. So I thought that was a better choice. The other thing, just from writing a paper point of view, we didn't want to blend data sources because the measurement method will then change from nation to nation for those sources. So by using the WDIs, we could have a consistent point of order. Now, I'm not saying the WDIs are perfect because they are not. Look at a country like Jordan, for example. One year they've got 10% unemployment, next year it's 0 for some reason. Now, clearly that's a reporting issue and you've got to deal with those things. But yeah, so we chose not to, for example, then look at IEA data for the future of renewables and then blend that with the WDI because we thought that risks different measurement approaches. So yeah, 2 reasons why we didn't consider that. But yeah, both absolutely valid points.
Shall we look at the questions of the chat?
Please, yeah. Does anyone in the chat have a question?
Yeah.
2 big questions.
Okay, great. Does someone want to read them out? I can't see them. Or maybe I can.
Just small.
Yeah, I can't. Yeah. Maybe someone can read them on their behalf. That'd be really good. Oh, wow. They're huge questions. Okay. I assume they're possible. Okay.
Can you read it?
Yeah, that's fine. So the first thing is sort of asking, so clearly even policymakers aren't aware of the just transition. So how do we make them aware of it? We could, through our work, educate people. That's one way. The other way might just be a function of waiting. I've just got a feeling, having worked in an institute called the International Institute for Carbon Neutral Energy Research, when that wasn't a term in Japan, and then 3 or 4 years later it is, we can already see those trends occurring in other nations. I think we can just wait for that to occur naturally. But as I said in my talk about the first survey was, education is critical. How we do that might begin with universities, might begin with publishing papers that identify this as an issue, but I don't think direct intervention is going to have as much impact as, say, just waiting for the time to be right in that case.
Maybe give some interviews.
Yeah.
To the mass media.
Yeah. All valid ideas, yeah.
Presentations in the social media.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So the future of nuclear energy is uncertain. I'm skeptical that without domestically abundant green or fossil resources, the need for considering Japan nuclear power is something inevitable to achieve a just transition. Yeah, and he talks about his time in the UAE and how they're thinking about this. Yes, I absolutely agree, and I think I made that point very briefly at the beginning. Japan has a lot of nuclear generation stock. There are power plants across the prefectures in earthquake-rich areas and earthquake-rare areas. It's everywhere. And if they don't use these assets, they become stranded assets. You can't just turn off a nuclear reactor. In fact, some of the nuclear fuel supply contracts are for 20 years. So the nuclear fuel is still arriving and still being paid for and still being maintained and all of these things. So pragmatically speaking, and if we're going to achieve a renewable energy or a low carbon energy transition, yes, Japan will use nuclear. It's good and bad. It's bad because horrible things like the Fukushima accident happened, not the first nuclear accident to happen in the world. But it's great because it's carbon neutral, at least in a country that imports all the fuel and doesn't have those associated supply chain costs, right? Not ideal. But the other thing that nuclear does for us is that buys us some time. I talked a little bit about learning curves. So over time, as we deploy more and more solar, it gets cheaper and cheaper to deploy. Over time, as we do more and more hydrogen, it gets cheaper and cheaper to deploy, and we can rely on other people's experience to do those things too. So if most of the nuclear power plants in Japan have 20 years left in their generation life, that gives us 20 years to develop the technologies that will replace and mean that we don't have to rebuild nuclear in the future. And I think a lot of countries are looking at this issue. I'd absolutely agree. But I think pragmatically speaking, by 2030, Japan could be 21% nuclear powered. And I think people will accept that in the medium term, but I don't think it will be politically possible to build new nuclear power plants. That seems to be the nature of that conversation. Yeah. I hope that answers the question. Yeah.
When you did your survey of people's preferences,
yes,
did you ask about nuclear?
We do. In fact, it's here, and in terms of, so these are just the knowledge ones. For example, this is a good one. This is where people, the bottom right for those that are online. People who would like to install PV in their own town is 33%, and in their own state 41%, but nuclear 6% thought it would be okay to build it in their town compared to 9% at the state level. So there's clearly a gap between what people want to see being built. And I can almost guarantee you that these people who said they're happy to have nuclear be built in their town or their state are people who are already associated with the nuclear industry. They're already deriving a benefit from being a member of that part of the energy system. It's the same in any country. Oil makers want to keep oil popular because they are benefiting directly from it. But ideally, the people who live and don't benefit from filthy, polluting fossil sources want these other things. We also do have some really good energy mix simulations that use people's preferences, and nuclear is always very low. And the reasons given are people think it's dangerous and unsafe. Now, that might not be true in all cases, but that's how people feel. And so that's how they make their decisions. And I think that's perfectly rational. Yeah. So yeah, really good questions. Thank you.
All right.
Greg.
Very quick comment. So about nuclear.
Yeah.
Last night on the television, close up Gendai.
Yeah.
Covered nuclear.
Yep.
And so we had a representative from METI, I guess quite high up in energy policy. Yeah. Was on the left of the screen. Yep. On the right of the screen was a professor here, I forget his name.
Sure.
From Newkoku University here in Kyoto.
Sure.
And he's outspoken person, he's anti-nuclear.
Yeah.
And they had a conversation, and the person from METI mentioned that he thinks that he didn't mention a year. Mm-hmm. I assume it's maybe about 230, a bit beyond. Yeah. He mentioned a ballpark figure of about 30% for nuclear. So that surprised me. Because that doesn't correspond with the energy mix for 230. And then they would start discussing new constructions actually. And so they were drawing attention to some historically sort of now just delayed projects. Yep. But yeah, they definitely were discussing the next sort of investment cycle. Okay. And the next wave of I guess smaller reactors. But yeah, that was just last night. And so that started obviously a national conversation. I think given the skyrocketing energy prices right now, fossil fuels, government industry sees as a chance to Of course. The reason I give 20% is very, very simple. Yeah.
Just before Fukushima happened, it was about 21%, and there's a general agreement in policy cycles that it shouldn't exceed that which it was immediately before it's just one of those very Japanese, understanding among gentlemen kind of things. It's not written hard or fast in any policy. The other thing too is METI is known to be pro-nuclear, and MEX is known, or maybe even the Treasury are known to be anti-nuclear. So if you ever go to a nuclear conference in Japan, it will always be funded by METI, and there will always be a representative there because they are pro. And it has to do with different economic regimes and economic ideas. But yeah, I think you did right too. With the advent of skyrocketing prices, if someone said we can cut your energy prices by having 10% more nuclear, some people would find that acceptable. Yeah.
So 20% is based on restarting all reactors?
No. It wouldn't be all. But so this is an energy mix diagram from that time. So this is Fukushima here. And this is what it was immediately before Fukushima. So I think it's going to be no more than that. That's the reason why I say 20%, because when this happened, they kind of said that's what it could be. This isn't the current energy system. This is a projected one based on people's preferences, but it's, that's the conversation that happened at the time. And that could very well change. And I think if they did run at full capacity, it would be closer to 31%.
They mentioned a really interesting policy trick, which was so a lot of plants have been idle for 10 years.
Yep.
So, and they have a designed lifespan.
Of 40, yeah.
Yeah. So they've taken that 10 years of idle.
Yep.
And then adding that to the lifespan.
And they also talk about 20-year retrofits as well. And it's basically the conversation is we won't build any new stuff, but we can use the existing stuff for a little bit longer. Yeah, no, that's completely rational, and that would fit within the policy regime. Absolutely. Yeah. No, good pickup. I think we're pretty good for time. What do you think?
We have another 5 minutes.
There you go.
Maybe another 2 questions. Is there anyone?
No pressure. Yeah.
Maybe this is now
Oliver.
I'm Oliver. I'm also an exchange student.
Great.
in
Germany.
Just here,
Yeah.
I see in this graph now that hydrogen
Yes.
is given there as a generation supply.
Yes.
But it's more as a secondary energy carrier, right?
Yes, it is a secondary energy carrier, but it can be used for direct firing for electricity generation, and it can be blended with LNG for electricity generation. And that's what that would represent.
Oh.
Yeah. Good pickup. Yeah. The blend ratio is very important. If you want to use hydrogen as a direct firing source, you need to use a ceramic turbine, not a metal turbine, because hydrogen will destroy metal turbines. But if you keep your blend ratio between 30%, below 30% with the LNG, you can use it in the same way because the LNG adheres to the metal first and stops the hydrogen from penetrating. But also the 30% is a magic number because the calorific value of hydrogen is lower than LNG. And if you had too much hydrogen, they cross over. You actually have to burn more gas to make the same amount of energy, and therefore you increase CO2. So there's this balance that we have with blending as well. Yeah, but that's what that slice represents.
What I meant was that the hydrogen here also has to be derived from some other.
Yeah, that's a really bad conversation. Let's not have that. Currently in the world, 92, I think is the most recent number I've seen, of 92% of hydrogen is made from fossil fuels. It's either gray and in some cases blue hydrogen. There might be some CCS, not a lot. Japan's an importing nation. They don't care. The point is it's CO2 free at the point of use, right? So if it comes from oil cracked in China, what do they care? I know it's not a good outcome for global CO2 goals, but if we allow some nations to reduce less CO2 than others, these kind of bad outcomes will happen. This hydrogen is probably important. So hopefully in 20 years, that means it's imported from clean sources or at least blue hydrogen sources. And look, there's a big push toward green hydrogen, but that happening locally in Japan, economically speaking, is not going to happen tomorrow. Yeah, but yeah, good questions and a very ugly topic. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe one last question.
Yeah.
May I ask you about Australia?
Sure.
So I'm wondering, have you looked at like Australia's situation with the just transition, especially that like its economy is a lot based on like the coal?
Yeah.
I guess this topic is quite relevant here.
Very relevant. Very relevant. Yeah, it's unfortunate, as you say. Australia has a very slim industrial profile. Like there's no manufacturing has been almost completely removed from Australia. So when I think of Australia, I think of the extraction industry and the retail industry. We used to manufacture. We used to make cars. We used to can fruit. We used to do it. Now we just export all those things. So we export raw materials and it comes back as processed materials. So yeah, in a country that says we want a just transition or a transition, but is deeply dependent on the sale of natural resources, yeah, that's a big deal. In fact, when I worked in the Queensland state government, they would make brochures about the clean energy future. And on the back, it would say, we have 300 years worth of export coal under the ground, and that's what's going to sustain Queensland. This is like 10 years ago. 300 years. Yeah, very good question. And yeah, absolutely relevant. Thank you.
All right.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think we are already beyond our time, so it's time to wrap up. So I'm sure that, probably everyone has also some other questions, but
Yeah, let's get it to the later session. Yeah.
maybe, yeah.
Yeah. All right.
If you wish, you can write to me or
Yes.
or to Andrew,
Yeah.
and we're sure to like answer your questions.
Absolutely. And I'll send the slides, and they have my contact details on the final slide too. So Dimiter will share those with everybody. And yeah,
Yes, yes.
ask some questions. And if you want more details, yeah, happy to talk about it.
Yeah, we have your contact information from the registration, so I'll definitely send to everyone today's slides.
Thank you very much.
And we'll also have them on the website.
Brilliant, brilliant. All right.
So yes, finally, let's give an applause again to.
Thank you very much. I will leave the people on the Zoom.
Yes.
Thank you all very much.